Good morning, everyone. Sorry, we're a touch late. Diane and I were just talking about filing our taxes. How
Yeah.
many of you are getting stressed out about that April 15th date coming right around the corner and you're saying, oh my gosh, I have to get that done, or I'm in the middle of getting that done, or oh, I owe a lot of money and I wish I don't know how I'm going to pay that. That's just a stressful time, this April 15th date, isn't it? Yeah,
For
so
me.
welcome that you're here, but I hope you're not having to still do your taxes.
Right. Or you're just finishing them up, but it is a stressful time and not one that any of us look forward to, is it?
Yeah, and we pay a lot of taxes, and yet, I'm grateful that we live in a country that,
Yeah.
we're not paying 60% of our wages in taxes. I've been to different countries where there's a lot of, government services, and they're wonderful, and yet you pay a ton of money in taxes for them as well. So, welcome Instagram. We're so glad you're here. We have a really, really important topic to talk about. We've been talking about really heavy topics all week long in preparation for our workshop on April 8th, and I hope you have signed up. I'll give you a link for that in a minute. It's a workshop on if he doesn't hit you, is it still abuse? And we've been talking about different dynamics in abusive relationships. And one of them is the blame game. The blame game. How many of you have ever played that game? Raise your hand if you've played the blame game. Yeah, we've all done it. We've all done it. I think it started in the Garden of Eden. Didn't it start there, Diana? Where
Absolutely.
Adam blamed Eve, Eve blamed the serpent, and the serpent blamed, God, you made me a, serpent. So it was just shifting over responsibility and not taking ownership for your part of the problem. And so we're going to talk about that. And what's the difference between the blame game and shared responsibility? What's the difference between the blame game and shared responsibility? Any thoughts, Diana? Or anybody actually, we'd like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see what our audience says. I certainly have a lot of thoughts about that. And especially when you say we've all played the blame game before, because instantly I resonate with it hides. I get to hide. Remember Adam and Eve, the next thing they did after they blamed one another, they hid. And I think I get to hide really myself when I'm blaming others.
And not only do you get to hide yourself, actually the biggest problem is you get to hide from yourself.
Yeah.
So the question that God asked Adam and Eve in the garden, which is a crazy question for God to ask, is where are you? Where are you? I mean, if God is omniscient, he knew exactly where they were. The problem wasn't that God didn't know where they were. The problem was they didn't know where they were. Right? They didn't know where they were. And so we've been talking all week about what is a healthy person versus an unhealthy person. We put this chart up. We're going to use this chart quite a bit in our workshop because what happens in abusive relationships sometimes is there's mutual sinning going on, right? There's mutual sinning going on. And there's a lot of blame game going on back and forth. So, so you didn't speak in the most respectful way to him. And so now he blames you for cursing and putting a hole in the wall or slapping you or whatever, because it's your fault that you upset him, right? And then you feel bad and you're taking the blame for his behavior. And so then there's sin leveling. Well, I hit you, but I know that was wrong. I'm a sinner, but you're a sinner too because you disrespected me. And so there's this blame and this leveling of sin because it's true. The Bible tells us that we're all sinners. We're all sinners. We are all going to sin. But what's the difference between a healthy sinner and an unhealthy sinner? Dinah, I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know if you're hitting something or a speaker or something. I'm hearing like a thumping in the background.
I was taking a note.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for saying that. So what's the difference between a healthy sinner and an unhealthy sinner? And we've talked a little bit about that. But there's a benefit to being an unhealthy sinner. There's a benefit of playing the blame game. And so let's just look at the benefits. If you blame other people for what you do, if you blame your husband because you lost your temper because he lost his temper, And it's tempting because when people do certain things, they do stir a reaction in us, right? When you blame someone for what you do, what's the benefit to that?
You know, Leslie, I think it's innate in us to want to blame others. It's just can be a pattern. There's two things that I see with this, that sometimes it's very innate in us to want to assign blame. Maybe part of our problem solving need. But the other thing is, I think we can be conditioned to take responsibility where the blame isn't ours.
Mm-hmm. It goes both ways. Sometimes we can take over and think, well, we're being more noble because we're taking ownership for something that's not ours to take.
Yeah.
So, and this is really important, ladies, because when you're in an unhealthy relationship with an unhealthy person, one of the things that happens to you is that sometimes, of course, you're going to get blamed for everything. And you start to believe somehow it's your fault and that you're responsible to fix it all. That if only you didn't disagree, if only you loved him more, if only you had more sex, if only you stood on your head when you're having sex, whatever it is, then he wouldn't watch porn, right? So somehow you're responsible for what he does because he's blaming you and you're taking that blame. Now, we're not talking about pushing the blame back on him. We've got our own stuff to take responsibility for, but not their stuff.
So it can be very confusing, and I would use the word suck us into this who's to blame mentality. Who's to blame for the suffering? Who's to blame for the abuse, the behavior? And I love that we're talking about this because there's always some ownership we have in this as well, but it might not be what we think.
Yeah.
Tracy, go ahead.
Tracy said something on Facebook. She said, everything is your fault, while shared responsibility is when we both agree the faults lie in each of us, maybe in different ways. This opens the door to healthy communication and discussion. There must be honest, not just words, and then returning to the same old my responsibility. And so, Tracy, you're alluding to what we're trying to get at is that, that I'm not responsible for you and how you behave, but I am responsible for me and how I behave, even if you aggravate me.
Absolutely. And so sometimes in the middle of an altercation or an interaction, it can be very confusing for us to figure this out. Like, what's my role in this? And I love the thought, what can I take responsibility for here that is legitimately mine to own?
Mm-hmm. Let's give a couple real life examples because I think this will help you. Okay, this is where, probably most of you in the audience are moms. So this is a probably easy one. So if your child is acting up, disobeying, doing something wrong, clearly doing something wrong, and you as a mom flip out and whack your child upside the head and hit their face in the process of it because you're so angry that they disobeyed you. Now let's unpack this. Who's responsible for what?
It comes to mind to me, and I probably think this is my mom. Two wrongs don't make a right.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but who's the grown-up? Yeah. So it's easy to say, you made me flip out, kid, right? It's easy to think that way because our kid is acting so wrong. They're acting so wrong. But if I'm the grown-up, then it's my responsibility to handle their wrong in a way that doesn't shame me as a grown-up, as a mother, in my own noble self, right? And so I'm responsible for how I handle their wrong. I'm not responsible for their wrong. They're responsible for their wrong. I might need to discipline them. I might need to punish them. I might need to put time out. I might need to take away privileges. There's all kinds of options I, as a mom, would have to choose. But flipping up out and whacking them on the upside of their head in a moment of fury, which probably all of us have thought of or done at one point or another. So let's not give each other a guilt trip. But who's responsible for that? I am. I'm responsible for how I handled it, even when they acted wrong. So this is the mature mindset. So if we think about healthy and unhealthy, okay? Now, children are children. So a child isn't fully mature yet. So they're going to do all kinds of things. But as we mature, we want to understand we're responsible for our side of the street. We're not responsible for their side of the street. So I'm not a bad mom because my child misbehaves. They're children. Children misbehave. Children don't listen. Children do what children do. I remember one of my flipping out moments was when my son was doing a cartwheel on the couch, which he had been specifically forbidden to do, and his foot hit the lamp and the lamp crashed to the ground and broke in a million pieces. And that was an expensive lamp. And, I didn't handle it in the best way as a mom, but he was clearly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I was clearly wrong too. Right?
How would you like to have handled that differently?
So had I been in my right mind, or had I been healthier at the time, I would have said, time out. Time out. Mom needs to go calm down or I'm going to wring your neck. And that's not what I want to do. Right. So
yeah,
I would have recognized that I'm not in a place to be a good disciplinarian right now. And I need a moment. And he needs a moment to recognize what he did and, hopefully own it and apologize. So that's what I would have done, because I wouldn't have been capable in that moment of being the kind of mom I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
But what I didn't want to do is show up and the mom I didn't want to be.
So recognizing that you weren't capable in that moment of responding in the way that you wanted to be, and taking responsibility for your response, allowing yourself to have time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it'd be the same way all of us in our physical bodies, ladies, all of us in our physical bodies have learned. As we've matured, we've learned how much capacity we have to hold our urine, hold our BM. We know how much, how long do I have? Like just before this Facebook Live, I said to Diana, I think I need to go to the bathroom. I didn't think I had a whole hour of capacity to sit here and hold my urine. So I thought I better go to the bathroom before this, right? We know that in our body. And we don't feel any shame. And we would never want to just pee ourselves in public because we didn't take responsibility for taking care of our body. But in the same way, when you're emotionally dysregulated by something, either yourself or something that someone did to you, all right? Your job as a mature human being is not just to vomit all over someone or pee all over yourself or them. Your job is to recognize I'm not in a capacity place. I'm out of capacity to handle this. I'm gonna do something dishonorable to myself, embarrass myself, shame myself by the way I handle it. I gotta get a break. I gotta go to the bathroom. Take care of me first before I can take care of this. That's what a healthy person learns to do, both biologically as well as psychologically, as well as relationally.
Well, I love that. The ability to take a pause and to notice that you're not strong in that moment really prevents you from victimizing someone else or to stepping into being a victim in that role.
Yeah. But let's reverse it. Let's reverse it, because I think most of our listeners here are women who are being blamed.
Right.
They're being blamed. So your husband is losing his cookies and he's driving like a maniac because someone cut him off, right? So he's blaming them for his reaction. And now you're being blamed because you're trying to calm him down and you don't understand. And here's this man who's frightening you and the kids by his overreaction to something because he doesn't know how to manage his feelings. And he doesn't even know he's responsible to manage his feelings. It's everyone else's fault. How do you notice, Diana, that women get caught in that cycle of taking responsibility, of being over responsible in those moments?
Well, I think as women, we naturally want to nurture and make things better. And so we step into problem solving mode. And sometimes when we step into problem solving mode, we make it our job to fix it, and to make things different. And so we get caught in that moment. The other thing is, if you're with someone who's blaming you and they're very intense, you're extremely dysregulated. You cannot think clearly. So there can be so much going on in that moment that we get stuck in that. And it's really easy in those moments for you to feel victimized, right? And helpless, which I think naturally kind of can pull us into really the role of a victim. And we can get stuck there emotionally, physically, sensationally, we can get stuck there. And that can be a repeated pattern.
And so let's define a little bit about what it means to take responsibility. So in the moment that we were talking about where my parenting skills were not available to me in the moment of my anger toward my son, taking responsibility doesn't mean I take responsibility for what he did. Taking responsibility means taking responsibility for what I need, right? And what I need in that moment is a break so that I can calm my nervous system down a bit, so I can handle the situation in a way that is better for everyone, for me, for him, the whole family. So when you're so being attacked by the blame game, someone's attacking you, it's all your fault that I'm married, you're breaking up our family, you're a disrespectful woman, you don't do anything I want, that's why I cheat, that's why I lie, that's why I watch porn, that's why I yell at you, right? So the unhealthy part of healthy is you want to take some ownership, because if you're healthy, you're aware you're a sinner. You're not a perfect person, right? So if you're healthy, you may self-reflect in those moments and you might say, wow, I didn't want to have sex last night. And I wonder if it's my fault that he, cheated today. Or, I know that dinner wasn't ready when he came home. And so maybe he's really hungry and he got me angry. So it's all about you self-reflecting, which is an important part of healthy, right? But then we could caught in, oh, I'm responsible to do it all so he never gets upset. And we're going to unpack all of this in our workshop in a much bigger way. So if this is resonating with you, that, wow, I get in this stance where he blames me and there's like a smidgen of truth to something he says. There might be 10% or 25% of truth to what he says. And so, yeah, I didn't talk all that respectful to him. Or, yeah, I did crash the car. Here's another story. I'm driving into the garage and I don't know why, I just misjudged. And I crashed the car into the side of the garage and broke the frame of the door, right? I did do that. Okay. So if my husband didn't flip out and treat me horribly, but some husbands might. Right. And then is it my fault when he blames me for his reaction? Is it my fault? Yes, it's my fault that I crashed into the garage. I'll take responsibility for that. But is it my fault that he acted that way toward me because I crashed into the garage? This is really important if you're in an abusive relationship, that you understand each of us are responsible for how we handle adversity. Adversity is going to be there. Jesus says, in this world, you're going to have hard. We've talked about hard in these Facebook Lives. So your husband has this belief that life should never be hard, and you, wife, shouldn't make it hard for me. And if you, wife, make it hard for me by not having dinner when I want, or not having sex when I want, or crashing the car into the garage, then it's your fault that I hurt you or beat you or lie to you or say awful things to you. It's all your fault. Yeah.
That's conditioning. And if you're not careful, if you sit with that a lot, you begin to believe it. And so I think the first thing is awareness of what you're responsible for. I'm not going to share responsibility in regulating your emotions or your reaction, but I will regulate mine.
Yeah, or I'm not going to take responsibility for controlling your hands. Your hands slap someone.
Yes.
If I slapped my child for doing his cartwheels on the couch or shook him, he didn't make me do that. I'm responsible for what my hands do. I'm responsible for what my tongue says. I'm responsible for what my mind thinks.
Yeah.
Right. And so when someone tries to make you responsible for what their hands did, what their mouth said, what their mind thinks, don't take those suitcases. Don't take the responsibility or the guilt trip for not taking responsibility. Don't take it. It's not yours to take. What are the costs, Diana? We talked about the benefits. One of the benefits of blaming other people is that nothing's ever your fault. And that's kind of nice because the world sucks, but I'm great. Right? Nothing's wrong with me. It's everybody else. And you get to feel self-righteous and you get to feel vindicated. So there's some benefits to blaming other people. You get to be immature. You get to be blind. You don't even know you're immature because it's everybody else's fault that you get upset. So there's some real perks in playing the victim.
We get to feel good about ourselves and who we are. Yeah.
So
Strong. I think it's a stronger position. It feels stronger. Sure. Doesn't feel realistic it doesn't feel honest or realistic, but it feels strong. Like I can be strong if I have that perspective.
Yeah. So what are the costs? Let's talk, because it costs you. It costs you to blame. What does it cost you? Anybody have any ideas? What does it cost you to blame other people?
I would say it costs me honest relationships. These are not honest and authentic relationships if I'm not willing to look at my role and what I might take responsibility for. Even if I'm not to blame for an act, I still have a part to play in how I respond. If I'm willing to be understanding where the other person is coming from, right? And I'm not speaking of abuse in this context, but I just think about, I have a business partnership with someone that I share an office with, and we have different perspectives. It can get intense between the two of us if we have different wants and different needs, but it's my responsibility to maintain my composure and to have a listening ear and a warm and compassionate heart. And of course, I'm talking about a healthy interaction here, a good relationship, right?
Yeah. So Lissa says one of the costs is you can't grow, right? So Diana just said something really profound. If we can't take a moment and look at our side of the street, then we can't grow even from a bad experience. So let's say that you have a bad experience where your husband is blaming you and blaming you and blaming you, and you feel like either the overfunction, like, yeah, it is all my fault and I've got to function, or you're not willing to look at yourself at all and say, wow, so he says you're too sensitive, or he says you're overreacting. And so you're not willing to look at yourself and say, is that true? Actually, it's not true. Or actually, it's true. I am sensitive. And I'm okay with being sensitive. That's the way God made me.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that if we're not willing to look at ourselves and evaluate, self-reflect, I mean, that's part of emotional intelligence. That's part of being a healthy, mature person. Now, we self-reflect and say, somebody might say, oh, that haircut looks terrible on you. And you might look in the mirror and say, you know what? I don't think so. I don't agree. Right? And it's okay for you to be different than someone else. But if you can't look at feedback, or you can't look at even negative criticism of you and say, is that true? I get a ton of criticism. Leslie, you're breaking up everybody's marriage. Leslie, you don't follow God. Leslie, you're, whatever. And I'll look at it sometimes if it's even given harshly. And I'll say, Lord, is this true? And most of the time, I don't sense any truth to it. So there's a place of looking at yourself and having that time of reflection so that you can grow. Because if you're always the victim and it's always everyone else's fault, there's nothing you have to learn. There's nowhere you have to grow because you're perfect.
Yeah, as I reflect on conversations I've had, even when I know I'm right and I'm not at fault, sometimes, often the feedback that I get about how someone is experiencing me, or someone who knows me well, and they'll come back with, yeah, but you blah, 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 whatever. I don't have a good example here. Or maybe you get really intense, because I do. There's something for me there to learn about myself in terms of how I might show up differently in that there's always some nuggets really that I can pull from that I can see myself then differently because I don't have the full picture. So I can take in that information about how someone sees me, and I can evaluate if there's an area of growth there for me or if their perception is off.
And I would add also, that's really, really important. And if you have a relatively healthy relationship with someone, that's a really important tool to do. But if you've been in a pattern of a destructive, abusive relationship, it's really important for you to understand, and we'll unpack this at the workshop. So if you, I see some things like Shehi on Instagram, how can I sign up for a workshop, or the Conquer? Actually, we'll open up Conquer at the workshop. So you don't have to attend the workshop to join Conquer, but that's when it'll be open, April 8th. And so go to leslievernick.com/join workshop, all one word. It was interesting, Diana. I was on a walk yesterday, and I'm in Prescott right now because my kitchen's being torn up in the other house. And this lady stopped me and she said, and I've met her on my walks. I don't know her personally very much at all, but she said, "Aren't you the one that deals with destructive relationships?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, and then she had a personal story and she wanted some help. And I said, I think it'd be really helpful for your family member to attend this workshop, because Christian women get so confused, and Christian leaders get so confused in relationship messes. And so it's really important for you to learn what healthy relationships look like. And we're going to unpack this. If he doesn't hit you, is it still abuse? I just got an email today, Diana, from someone who said, I sent my pastor a letter saying my husband's being abusive, and my pastor sent me this email back saying I need to suffer for Jesus and that's a righteous sacrifice. And what do you think about this? I'm going to talk about this at the workshop. I'm going to talk about this spiritual gaslighting that happens, because that's abusive. Using God's word to endorse oppression, abuse, and relational damage. Is that biblical? Is that healthy? No. But what do you do with those verses then? How do you process them? So if you're a believer and you're really caught in a destructive, abusive relationship, but it's not physical, but you're not sure how to put words to it, you definitely want to come to this workshop. It will help you not only see what's going on, which Diana said is so important when you begin to see things both in yourself and others. And then what do you do about it? What do you do about it? How do you work on yourself so that you're not so easily bullied? Because somebody might give you some feedback about yourself, like you're just a terrible wife, right? Now, it's hard to look at that and say, am I a terrible wife? And it might be true that you are unwilling to do the things he wants you to do, so he would label you as a good wife. You're unwilling to engage in certain sexual practices. You're unwilling to co-sign on a loan. You're unwilling to do certain things that he wants you to do, and so he's going to define you as a terrible wife. But how would you define you? How is God defining you? And this is really important, because so many of us as Christian women have learned to be husband-centered women and not God-centered women. And that will hurt you. That will hurt you. Your husband is not your source of your identity or your well-being. God is. God may use your husband, especially if he's a good husband, to provide some of that. But if you've got a bad husband, he's not providing that at all.
I love that, Leslie. If you're caught in a cycle of being blamed, it can be so confusing, and it can render you powerless. And I love what you just said. My identity is not going to be spoken over me by someone who is destructive. My identity is going to be spoken over me by God.
Yeah, and I think this is so, so important, because if you're in this situation, so many of you are weakened by it, right? And then sometimes when you start listening to people like me or others online, there's lots of people now online. When I first started, there was nobody online teaching about this, but there's more people, but they don't always teach wisely. So pay attention to who you listen to, because what I see happening to women is when they finally get it. Oh my gosh, I'm being abused.
Yes.
Now they're the victim. Now they're the victim, and they are the victim. They are the victim. But what they're not doing is they're not taking responsibility for not their victimization, but their recovery, their safety, their
Absolutely.
healing, right? They're just caught in blaming him. Oh, he's the abuser. He's the narcissist. He's the covert narcissist. He has to change. No, it's all true. He might be, and you might be the victim. Just like if a rapist raped you, you're the victim. But focusing on the rapist isn't going to help you get well. Now you have to take responsibility for yourself, the injuries that are to your psyche, soul, body, mind, the lies that you've believed. How do I get well from this victimization is your responsibility question, not just focusing on, I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. Finally, someone believes me, I'm a victim. Yes, you are. And you're responsible to get well. If you were victimized by a drunk driver today and you end up in intensive care tonight, who's responsible for you to get well? You.
I love that.
You.
I like this. I picked it up when I was doing juvenile work. It's called Stick and Move. And so once you recognize that you're not to blame for the abuse that is happening to you, move. Stick on that truth and move. Don't get stuck in the needing more validation and focusing on all of the bad behavior. But what am I going to do about it? As you said, how will I get strong? How will I get well? Where can I find support?
So good. And so don't think of the big step like, oh my gosh, I have to leave. That's too big of a step for so many of you. And I'm not even suggesting that that's the best step. You don't know that yet. The first step is you're here. And so you're educating yourself. You're taking responsibility for yourself and saying, I need to learn some new things. I need to learn what God really says in the Bible because I've been told this. And maybe just like this woman who emailed me today and said, this is what my pastor, she clipped it right out of the email. This is what my pastor told me. So I'm going to respond to her. Actually, I'm going to write a blog about it for next week. So if you want to hear about it, then I'll just answer that question because I can't just spend all my day answering personal questions. But when really resonates with, I think, a larger audience, I want to answer it for the larger audience. And so this is so, so important that you know God and you know his word. And God is 100% all the time, everywhere in the Bible, against the abuse of power, against the oppressor, against misusing one's power, whether you're a parent, whether you're a husband, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a politician. He's against using power to suppress, oppress, and control other people, especially in unhealthy, damaging ways. And God has a lot to say about that in his word. And so I want to unpack all that for you on this workshop. So please, your first step is to be here. Your second step is to come to the workshop. Sign up for it right now. It's leslievernick.com/join workshop. It's entirely free. I'm giving you all this time, and I'm giving you an hour of my time and an hour of our coach's time and me to answer your questions after the workshop. I've created an 8-page workbook for you to have with Bible verses all over it that I can't have the time to unpack in the workshop totally, but you'll have the references so that you can do your own homework to figure this out so that you can take responsibility for where you are in your relationships and how you show up on your side of the street and maybe how you get out of relationships that are dangerous and unsafe. I wonder, I've been seeing some questions here, Diana. I wonder if it'd be great to start answering some questions. We have about another 25 minutes left in our time. So let me answer. How much is it? The workshop is free, honey. The workshop is free. I want to do everything for free. Not everything. I can't do everything for free because guess what? I still pay Diana for being here. I still pay my technician for being here. And so we can't do everything for free. We want to do as much as we can to as many people as we can without cost. And then if you want deeper help and more concentrated help, yes, we do charge for some of our things, but it's free. The workshop is free. And let me just tell you one more thing. I've been talking to some of my colleagues right now, and they've been saying that they've been having workshops for all kinds of different things, and people don't show up. They sign up and they don't show up. I'm telling you that this workshop is worth, I don't know, $500, $1,000 in counseling time. It's worth a lot to you if you want to get healthy, if you want to get clear, especially as a Christian woman, on what the Bible has to say about all this and what you can do about all of this. And so I'm going to give you 4 signs of an abusive relationship in the workshop. I'm also going to give you 4 Christian beliefs that most of us have had that are wrong, but have kept us stuck in abusive relationships. And how do you break up with those beliefs? And then I'm going to give you some next steps. And so please show up live, because there's going to be 2 more components to this workshop that you will not get. You will get a recording. I'm not even being stingy. You can have the recording and watch it afterwards if you can't come. I want you to learn this stuff. It's so important. But showing up live gives you something else. It gives you a sense of, we're not going to be here. We're going to be on a private webinar jam site, so that you're not on social media, so that you have the freedom to be a little bit more transparent in what you say. Your name doesn't have to be on the chat. You could just put your first name. You can put an anonymous name if you want there. So you can be much more anonymous on the chat, and then you can communicate with, my coaches will be on there. Other people will be on there who are familiar with these things, so that you can get some support even in the chat and understand that you are not alone. Almost 2,000 women have already signed up for the workshop. This is a huge issue in our culture right now. Abuse is everywhere, not just in marriages, but everywhere. You need to know your Bible to know how to handle it. It's not just turn the other cheek all the time. All right. And I don't know if I'll have the time to unpack that verse in our workshop, but I know it's not meaning in an abusive relationship that's what you're supposed to do all the time. And show up live, because after the workshop is over, we give a full hour, sometimes hour and a half, to your questions. And you don't have to worry about them being on social media. When you get the recording of the workshop, all you get is the recording. You don't get the chat. You don't get the Q&A time, because we want to make sure that the chat and the Q&A time is as private as possible. And so it doesn't go out to everybody who signs up. It only is there live for those who are attending. So I just encourage you to show up, put it on your calendar right now. April 8th, circle it, noon Eastern time or 7:30 p.m. Eastern time live. I will be there live both times, and one of my coaches will be there with you live both times. All right. So we've got some questions. Diana, do you have them in front of you, or let me pull them up?
I do.
Okay.
The first question, how would you recommend a pattern of misleading and deceit? That's not a clear question. I'm not sure what that means. How would you recommend a pattern of misleading and deceit?
So I'm just going to make up what I think it means. So
Okay.
if you're in a relationship with someone who has a pattern of misleading you and deceiving you, then guess what? They don't get my trust. Right? So I'm responsible for where I put my trust. And so if I'm a healthy person, Proverbs 25, I think, or 25, 29, or 29, 25, somewhere around the 20s in Proverbs, it says, do not trust. No, it doesn't say it that way. It says putting your trust in an untrustworthy person is like chewing on a broken tooth.
Oh.
Or walking on a broken foot. It's going to cause you more pain, right? So the Bible doesn't tell us to trust everyone. It tells us to love everyone, even our enemies. It does not mandate that you trust everyone. And God has given you something I call a BS meter inside of you, and we all have one. And so when you're in a relationship with, there's someone who has a pattern of misleading and lying to you, then your responsibility to this person is, I can't trust you. So what boundaries do you need to put around yourself so that you're not harmed by this person's actions? So when they say certain things that, like, yes, we have enough money in the bank. I might check to make sure we have enough money in the bank. Or yes, I paid the taxes. I might check with the Internal Revenue Service to make sure our tax return was received. So there's ways that you might have to check on the validity of what they're saying. Just like if you can't trust your child anymore because they've lied to you, they have to rebuild that trust before you just give them carte blanche privileges anymore. You still love your child, but you don't trust them. Jesus didn't trust certain people because he knew what was in their heart. And so I think in a relationship, trust is fragile. Trust is fragile. And we can love someone that we don't trust. And so what do you need to do to steward yourself, protect yourself? Another verse that doesn't get enough attention in the Bible is in Proverbs as well. In Proverbs 3, it says, or 4, Proverbs 4, Google it, you can find out where it's at. Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. So that's what I would say, that's your work to do. You can't change him, but you can understand that if you trust him, it's going to have a negative impact on you. Any thoughts, Diana?
I thought you covered that really well. I would add to that, I would emphasize what you said. Trust needs to be rebuilt. And trust is separate from forgiveness. You can forgive his indiscretions or the person that has lied to you, but that doesn't make them a non-liar. And that doesn't mean that trust has been rebuilt just because they have asked for forgiveness. That is something that is earned across time. And so for me, I have to remind myself that I'm in a relationship with someone that I can't trust. I don't know if I'd call it a relationship, but I'm in an interaction with someone that I can't trust. And so what that looks like is I have to continually remind myself they are untrustworthy, because technically I am a trusting person. So I have to, when the Lord says be vigilant, I have to be vigilant and remind myself of that. And so, because I think we get confused, like we forgive someone and then we think they've earned the right back in. So we kind of have to learn that. And that's part of what we do in our coaching, and is teach how to walk in that so that you can guard your heart, because it doesn't just happen naturally. It's something we work toward.
Yeah. Most of the time, actually, we give our trust pretty freely until someone shows us that they're not trustworthy, right? Mm-hmm. So I remember being in Russia, and I was getting in the cab because I was speaking, and I was getting in cab with a Russian person who I didn't know, and I'm thinking, I don't even know this person, and I'm getting in their cab. Thankfully, I had a translator with me so she could translate. So if something went wrong, but they would drink in the car. They would drink vodka in their cab. And so finally, I had a cab driver who didn't drink vodka. And so I said to him, "Would you be my driver all week?" Because I thought because I couldn't trust this driver again. I couldn't trust. I got in his car, and then I learned I couldn't trust him. I got in his car, learned I couldn't trust him. It wasn't that he was driving bad, but he was drinking while he was driving. And so I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that. And so I think this is really part of your work to do in relationships. We don't trust people who are untrustworthy. The Bible tells us not to do that. And the other verse is in Proverbs 25 or 29, somewhere it says, putting your trust in an untrustworthy person is stupid, basically. And so you can Google that. Where does the Bible talk about not trusting people? And it'll tell you. But I think that the Bible does say, be careful about certain people. The Apostle Paul warns Timothy, hey, Timothy, be careful of I can't even remember his name, because he did me great harm. And I'll talk about that in the workshop. Be careful of this person. He did me great harm. I don't trust him. He's not trustworthy. And God has given us that internal BS meter to know inside that someone isn't trustworthy, and we are foolish to trust them if they're not trustworthy. And they've shown us that.
Leslie, I'm going to answer this question from the chat. And Tracy's asking, can I still join even though I'm post-divorce? And I want to say that this is a topic that is not just for people who are in marital relationships. Many of us have destructive people in our lives. And what I've discovered, I don't know if you would agree with this, Leslie, but if we are in one destructive relationship, we may have many. And so what you will learn is going to serve you well in terms of what is destructive and what is abusive, especially when it's not physical. It can be very insidious and hard to detect. So it's important that we parse that out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if you're in a relationship with someone who isn't a spouse, maybe you're out of a marriage. And one of the things that we've learned in our Conquer membership group is that sometimes women join Conquer because they're in a couple of destructive relationships, or they've been in a couple of destructive marriages. Because what happens oftentimes when you're a victim and you don't do your work, not just to heal, but to grow, You get out of a bad relationship and you think, okay, I'm out of that relationship. I think I'll start dating again. That feels much better than grieving over this lost relationship. And so I'll start dating again. But your BS meter and your discernment meter of who is healthy and who isn't healthy, they might be charming, but they might not be healthy. And sometimes we haven't learned how to discern the difference between charm and character. And so we fall for another charming, love bombing guy. And then we get another destructive relationship after we're married. And we're thinking, how did this happen again? And so you do have your own work to do. And so be sure, if you've been in a destructive marriage and you're out of it, attend the workshop. You may still want to join Conquer, because this is Conquer's about Christian women in destructive relationships getting healthier. How do I learn to have boundaries? There's a question in the chat right now. What do you do, Jennifer, when your husband has anger outbursts towards you? One is that you have to learn to recognize the cycle, and what do you need to do to get safe? What do you need to do to have better boundaries so that he doesn't have access to you to continue to harm you? And it might mean, I don't know what angry outbursts mean. So if he's coming at you with a knife, call the police, call 911. He is committing a crime when he does that. If it's verbal vomit, then what do you need to do to guard your heart above all else? Where do you need to go? How do you need to structure your space so that you have a safety plan? All those things that we talk about in our membership in Conquer are things that you're not going to change him, but what do you need to do to protect yourself and those little kiddos that might be listening to this as well?
Yeah.
Okay, next question. What if your husband doesn't yell or blame? He just completely ignores and avoids the situation, the problem, and you.
Well, doesn't that feel destructive as well? It's a different form of destructive abuse, and neglect is abusive. I've heard you speak on that, Leslie, many times. So what if he doesn't yell or blame, but he just completely ignores me? What is the impact to me, and how is that harmful for me? And what will I do with that?
Yeah, you got any ideas, or you want me to start with it?
I do.
I do what? I do want to start with it, or I do have ideas.
I do. Oh, I'm sorry. I do want you to start with it. Yeah.
Okay. Neglect, they're discovering in child abuse literature that neglect is one of the most painful kinds of child abuse. Because if a parent hits a child, at least they've put some energy into the relationship of correction and discipline, even though they've done it wrong. But when a parent completely ignores a child as if they don't matter, it really does something to a child's sense of self, because I'm not worth caring for. I'm not worth feeding. I'm not worth taking to school. I'm not worth buying school clothes for. I'm not worth talking to. I'm not worth disciplining. I'm not worth engaging in any way. And so it really can assault your self-worth when you're married to someone who's made a covenant promise to not neglect you, and then he completely checks out. So two things. One is I would really work on not taking it personally. There's something really damaged in him that he's so shut down. It's not about you, but it is impacting you, right? It's not about you. Just like if your husband had schizophrenia, it's not about you, but it's impacting you. It scares you. It's hard to live with. It may not be possible to live with depending on his behaviors. So it's not about you, it's about him. But what do you need to do to either stay in this marriage in a peaceable way, and probably just by not bugging him, you can do that. Or what do you need to do to get out of the relationship? And so I think having a conversation with him may or may not do anything. You might say, hey, I'm really not liking the way we're living right now. What do you want to do about it? I'm not willing to continue this. Now, if you feel like he's going to escalate or get dangerous or cut off the money or those kind of things, pay attention to the patterns that you've been in. But I think some women who are older and have put up with this a really, 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 really long time don't have the resources, at least not anywhere soon, to move out, get a job. That just feels so overwhelming and way too scary. So I would say part of it is accepting reality, sort of like you have a person in your home who's disabled, who cannot be relationally involved with you. They're fine sitting and watching TV all day and just living by themselves. And so what do I need to do to have community? Do I need to find a church, a Bible study, a girlfriend? Do I need to go on trips with other women? Do I need to build a life of joy and, enjoyment with my children and my grandchildren without him, and not expect him to partner with me, as long as he's not actively hurting you in ways that are verbal or financial, those kind of things? That's one choice. Another choice is to kind of use the biblical grounds of abandonment. He's abandoned you. He's abandoned you in every way. The Bible says that when someone leaves, let them leave. Well, he's left. He hasn't left the house, but he's left the relationship. He's left. So you're not continued to be tied to him when he has left the relationship and he is not engaged anymore. And so that would be something that you have to wrestle with yourself, your conscience, and the Lord. But those would be your two options. Diana, you have any other ideas?
Yeah, I would just add to that, you may have over time really reached out and tried to engage him in all of the ways that possible. So as a part of your doing your work, I would let go. Let go of the need to change him, to talk to him. It's that acceptance piece that you talked about, Leslie, that can be so freeing. And when we let go of the need for him to be different and for me to play a role in that, then I can start looking at how it's impacting me and what do I want to do about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I hope that's helpful. The replay is available on this page if you are needing to leave early or you want to rewatch it. Here's a question. What's the definition of oppression? Queen Bee wants to know that. What would you say is the definition of oppression? I see that in the chat.
Wow. I'm almost wanting to go, what's oppressive? Oppression and oppressiveness is when I kind of look at it in terms of someone's trying to control, dominate, overpower, or manipulate me. That can be oppressive. It's entering into a system where someone is not allowing me to be me. I'm not being heard. I don't have a voice. I don't have the ability to influence, to choose, or any of those things. And so oppression can come in so many different forms, right? Oppression can be financial. It can be emotional. It can be spiritual. And the means where we come under oppression from other people can be varied as well. It can be physical. It can be, I kind of dance in the covert kind of stuff. And so oppressiveness can be just a tone, a look, somebody just sizing up, overpowering you. And so oppressive, I think, really you have to weigh and ask yourself, am I feeling oppression in this situation, in my role at work, or with the way my husband is behaving toward me, with his tone, with his demeanor, with his size? And I hope that's kind of a very expansive definition, but it comes in many forms.
Yeah, I want to put a big caveat here, though, because I think that our culture has become more and more toxic. Our culture is very unhealthy, right? So we are intolerant of differences, and we might call that oppressive because you're not letting me be me, and I'm different than you, and so because you don't like me or you don't agree with me, I'm being oppressed now. That's not the definition biblically of oppression. Right? We're going to be different. We're going to have different values. We're going to have different political parties that or political systems that we're supporting. We're going to have different religious beliefs. And tolerance means that you get to be you and I get to be me. And we can have a conversation where we disagree about that. And we may disagree about that in pretty strong ways. Hopefully, we would still be respectful of each other as human beings. That's not happening in our culture. But even if I was disrespectful to you, that's not oppressing you. All right. It's sinning against you. It's being icky. Oppression requires someone with more power. So if I have more power so that I can silence you. So if I'm a policeman and I have power and you're trying to explain something to me and I pull out my gun, and you're like, okay, I'm giving in. I'm not going to talk anymore, right? So I'm silenced by someone who uses their power inappropriately to silence the conversation or to silence the disagreement. That's what oppression is. So here's where it gets really murky, because there is authority. There are policemen. I'm happy for policemen in our world. I'm happy for politicians. I'm happy for pastors. I'm happy for parents, people who have authority over us, right? That are people who have authority over us, and they can, enforce the laws and say, hey, you're not doing the right thing and you're going to go to jail. So we have a government, and Romans 13 talks about that. That's not oppression. But when a organization uses their power for selfish, sinful ways, then that's what the Bible would call oppression. So when in the Bible culture, for example, there were slaves. Were slaves oppressed? In the general culture, they were. When the Bible was written, God didn't say get rid of slavery, although I don't believe God supports slavery for a moment. But what he did say to the Jewish culture is, hey, Jews, treat your slaves better than that. Set them free after 7 years of service. Don't treat them like dogs, treat them like human beings. And so he's saying, hey, in an institution where there is inequality, which there was in that culture, in our culture, there's inequality, we still treat people with dignity and respect. And so oppression is when we treat people like animals, when we treat people like less than, because we're the bully and we get to have the final say. And we do it in a spiritual way. We do it in a financial way where we oppress the poor by taking advantage of them, by hurting them, financial, all those kind of things. So that's what I would mean. I think the Bible means by oppressors, and God hates that. He talks about uneven scales. He talks about when people, use their power. And so just a Bible verse. Let me give you a Bible verse that supports this. It's all in the workshop. I will not have the Bible verse at the top of my head, but it's in Matthew and Mark and Luke. So if you just read about when Jesus washed the disciples' feet, okay, when Jesus was washing the disciples' feet, he was teaching them about leadership. And in that moment, he said, hey, guys, I'm going to give you authority. I'm going to give you power. But guys, do not misuse that power to rule over others like the Gentiles do. Instead, I want you to use this as an example. Jesus could have used the example for leadership of him whipping the guys out of the temple. He could have used that story. He didn't. He used the story of him washing their dirty feet. He said, this is what leadership looks like. And so please don't use the authority and power I'm giving you to oppress others like the Gentiles do. And so husbands who have leadership are not to oppress their wives. Pastors who have leadership are not to oppress their parishioners. Even in Ephesians, God says, parents, do not aggravate your kids so much in your parenting that you kill their spirit. Don't do that. Right? Diana, I'm still hearing all that typing. It's really coming back as bad feedback on my end.
I think we're having some streaming issues. I don't know if it's you or me.
Okay. Sorry, guys. We're having some sound issues. I'm not sure where I'm not anything, but okay. So that's what the Bible says about oppression. That answers it.
Yeah.
Do we have another question? We're out of time. We're out of time. All right. We hope that we hope you sign up for the workshop at lesliebernick.com/join workshop. And what's your takeaway from today? What's your takeaway from today? Write it in the chat.
Yeah.
Or write it in your journal. Even if you don't want to write it in the chat, please do that, because we really want you to say, what did God say to me today? For me, the blame game is an unhealthy relational style that you want to step out of. And you can't take responsibility for them, but you must take responsibility for you. That doesn't mean you take the blame for you. You take responsibility for you, for your safety, for your well-being, for stewarding your one precious life.
Amen.
What's your takeaway? Our next one is going to be Monday morning, and it's going to be on what does it mean to be a God-centered, not marriage-centered woman? What does it mean to be a God-centered, not a marriage-centered or man-centered woman? So we'll talk about that on Monday. And I think I'm going to be by my lonesome.
I think so.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
that Monday at noon, same time, and we'll see you there.
All right.
All right. I'm a steward of my life. Yeah. One of my takeaways. I'm a steward of my life. You are a steward of your life. Even if you're a wife, you are to steward. God says, guard your heart. Who does that? You do. God says, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. Who does that? You do. You do. You can't blame other people for the way you think. You've got to take stewardship of that.
All right.
What other takeaways? Any other takeaways before we wrap up? I'm just looking. I don't see any, but I'm sure there are. Noon, what time zone? I'm sorry, Eastern time zone. We always make things in the Eastern time zone, even though we're all on different time zones. Noon, Eastern time zone. So I'll be there at 9 o'clock in the morning because I'm on the other time zone. But all of you, noon Eastern, that's the time zone. Figure it out where you're at. All right, go ahead. Anything else you want to share before we end?
Well, don't miss the webinar. It's really intensive teaching, and you will find hope and some tools for moving forward. So join us at the workshop.
Okay. Thanks so much. God bless. We'll see you Monday. Bye-bye. Have a great weekend.